Today on The State of Us, record beef prices, but ranchers aren't cashing in on a $66 billion industry. You're feeding America and going broke doing it. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by none other than the friendly redneck liberal and senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. Today, the $66 billion beef industry. Who's losing? Well, it might surprise you to find out that the ranchers, the cattlemen, are losing. And you might say, what? You just said it's a $66 billion industry. How are the people that are raising the animals losing out? Well, it's a great question, and it's a great piece from the New York Times here covering in depth what has brought us to this point, but also the history of what we've done in the past to try to mitigate it and what this could mean for the future. And you might say, how does it impact me? Well, it is a $66 billion industry, and my guess is that the majority of people listening to the show probably have eaten beef before. And probably eat it pretty regularly, as we know from data that most Americans, in fact, do. So it's a very important issue and one that we're going to endeavor to dive into today. But we can't do that, Lance, until we find out what the word of the day is.
Well, if you've been to the store in the last 6 months, as I do on a regular basis, you know that it's costing you more to buy your beef. And so that's where I think it hits most people.
Is that frustrating?
It's frustrating when you look at who's getting the money from it,
okay.
But it is not necessarily a new story in American business. It's taking out the worker and making money in the middle, and monopolistic practices, it seems like, as I read the article. But I will try to, that's my first mordant comment. I always thought the word was pronounced mordant, M-O-R-D-A-N-T. An adjective, but in my trusty Webster's dictionary, it's mordant, and it means biting, cutting, caustic, or sarcastic as speech, wit, etc. So I'm not sure I will hold my tongue. I might have many mordant comments towards the beef packers industry, because I think that's where the problem lies, is with the packers.
Turning to the article, judging from the prices at supermarkets and restaurants, this would appear to be a lucrative moment for cattle ranchers like Steve Charter. America is consuming more beef than ever. That's right, more beef than ever, while prices have climbed by 1/5 over the past year, a primary driver for the growing alarm over inflation. But somewhere between American dinner plates and his 8,000-acre ranch on the high plains of Montana, Mr. Charter's share of the $66 billion beef industry has gone missing. He's a third-generation cattle rancher and is accustomed to working 7 days a week, 365 days a year, in winter temperatures descending to minus 40 degrees and in summer sweltering reaching 110 degrees. So, no stranger to hard work by any means, but the distress that American cattle ranchers are facing, and that he specifically represents, is the underside of the staggering winnings harvested by the conglomerates that dominate the meatpacking industry. That's Tyson Foods, Cargill, and a pair of companies controlled by Brazilian corporate owners, National Beef Packing Company and JBS. Since the 1980s, the four largest meatpackers have used a wave of mergers to increase their share of the market from 36% in the 1980s, Lance, to 85%.
Well, and you say, what does this mean to the humans? Steve Charter, a lifelong farmer with 6 grandchildren who thought, they would continue his way of life, has had zero profits for the last 5 years, and now is thinking of doing something that would have been unthinkable before this, and that is selling off his entire herd. And Mr. Charter is quoted with his voice catching as he choked back tears. "We are contemplating getting out. We are not getting our share of the consumer dollars." So while the meatpacking industry, the harvesters of the cattle, are making more money and controlling more of the product than ever before, more than twice, as you pointed out. The people who are producing the product are going to have to quit making it because they can't make a living.
And that's in contrast, Lance, because the ranchers, they're tallying their losses, right? Well, but JBS, one of those four that we just mentioned, is celebrating big gains. In fact, revenues of $18 billion between just July and September of last year.
Well, it says here too, later in the article, that last year, cattle ranchers received only 37 cents of every dollar spent on beef. Okay. And one other rancher had some cattle for sale, and he said his break-even point was $1.30. And when he called to take them to market, he was told, we'll pay you $1 for it. So you've spent all this time and all this work and energy and money to produce this product, and we're going to pay you less than the break-even price. I mean, why would you, as a business person, why would you stay in business doing that when they're going to pay you less than what it costs you to just break even? I mean, we're not talking about being able to pay your bills and feed your own family. You can't even get out of the product what you produced it. Yet when I go to the supermarket, I'm paying 20, 30, 40% more for the same cuts of meat that I was paying 2 years ago.
It'd be easy as the consumer, right? I mean, Lance strolling through Kroger looking for that bargain deal on beef, the buy two, get one free, or buy one, get one free on the pot roast. You always got to keep an eye out for that one. You might assume when you're looking at those prices, like, oh my gosh, these seem like they're a lot higher than they were the year before. Whatever we said there, 32%. So it might seem like the ranch, you would reasonably assume that, well, the people that raise the cattle certainly must be making more money. And even if you don't think they're making more money, you'd think, well, they've got to be making at least the same amount of money. And it's actually neither of those. They're actually making less money.
Well, there's another rancher mentioned in the article who has been doing this his entire life. He's 38 years old, and he raised some cattle, and based on past experiences, he figured he'd take them to market and get about $125,000 for it. The bid was $32,000. And this isn't somebody who's just like, well, I hope I make this money because this is what I need to break even. No, the market has, when I've taken this kind of product to market in my lifetime, this is a fairly normal amount that I will get. And they got 1/5, 20% of that, or 1/4, 25% of that. And actually contemplated suicide because it's like, well, I've already got $60,000 in debt. I thought I was going to pay down my debt, and now I'm even more in debt, and my wife's a nurse, and we're paying bills with hers, and this is my whole life, and it's just basically going up in front of my eyes.
And the biggest assets that I own, which supposedly everybody around the world wants, somehow are worth nothing.
Well, they made the point, the ranchers made the point is, we couldn't sell our cattle to break even. Yet when we went into the grocery stores, there wasn't any beef in the store for us to buy. Think on that one, folks, as we, near the break here and we transition in a couple of minutes. Wait a minute. I have a product that I'm willing to sell. The people who buy it from me will not give me at least a break-even price, much less a profit price on the product. Yet when I go to the store and all my neighbors go to the store locally, there's not enough of that product for us to buy.
Well, it makes me mordant, Lance. I'm sure it makes you mordant, and hopefully it makes our listeners mordant
Well, you got the win. I'm just going to concede after that. I'm not sure that should count. That should be under Bradley's rules interpretation.
Oh, you think so? Yeah. It was used properly. I'm pretty sure I can say it that way. But
Mordant. I'm just tired of all these Mordant comments. Mordant. That's all it is. Everybody's just Mordant. Can we get some positivity on the show?
I think you have to use it, in some kind of proper sentence, I think. But anyway, really though, it should be something, I hope, that you're listening out there and you're thinking, this is crazy. There's got to be a law against this, right? There's got to be something out there, because surely the United States of America can't just allow something like this to happen. Well, You wouldn't be crazy for thinking that, because the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 was adopted by Congress to safeguard, to quote, this is from the act, right, from the bill itself, to safeguard farmers and ranchers, among other participants, from, quote, unjustly discriminatory and monopolistic practices. So it sounds like, Lance, I mean, I'm no legal expert here, but to safeguard farmers and ranchers from unjustly discriminatory and monopolistic practices. Okay. So it sounds like we have a law, right, that says you can't do this, that this isn't fair. And you might also be sitting there asking yourself at home, if they're getting such bad prices at some of these places they go, then why don't they go to somebody else? I mean, why not, right? I mean, if somebody offers you $1 and you need $1.30, well, just go take it to somebody that offers $1.30, right? I mean, that's should be simple, should be easy. Just go to somebody else, because there's got to be a better option. Well, unfortunately, as we're going to talk about here coming up, not quite that simple. It used to be easier. To do that. These people aren't going to offer you a good price. Oh, well, just take them to market, right? For those that do not know, I used to raise cattle for a number of years. And my grandfather, and when my father was a child, they raised cattle as well. And a term that was used here, and people call it, different things around the country, but it was, we'll take the cattle to market, right? And what do you say when you take them to market? Well, it means that you're taking them to a place that does an auction where they're sold. And you say, okay, well, that sounds good, right? Because then different people bid and, you get the best price. And well, right, that is how it mostly used to be. But now it's not that way so much. And I even noticed this as I was getting out of the business, and this was 10 years ago now. I had noticed the trend of you were going to these places and they were scarce. There weren't always a lot of cattle there, and there weren't very many people there bidding. And I'm thinking to myself, that's strange. There's a lot of people in the cattle business in the state of Ohio. There's a lot of cattle. Demand is at record levels, so why is nobody here? Why is nobody at market? Why is that? What do you think? Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Lance has the answers. We're going to find out. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Capitalism. We're going to sell to the person that's going to give us the best price, right? It's worth what somebody will pay. And for many, many years, the beef industry has operated somewhat along those lines. For much of its history, that's how it operated. But lately, not so much. And part of the way it did is what we talked about before break, Lance, which was this notion that you can load up your cattle in a trailer, you can drive to a sale barn or auction house, and you unload your cattle and they're inspected, usually by somebody from the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. Make sure they meet some basic standards, make sure they're in good health. And then they go before a group of people that are sitting there that look at these cattle as they come in, lots of cattle, and you bid on them and you buy them and you get the price. People look at them, and if they're really good, the butcher or the slaughterhouse or the meat packer or whoever is there, right, they're going to bid a higher price because, that's a good cow. I'm going to get good beef from that. It's going to yield a good return. So I'm going to pay more. That's not exactly how it's always operated, but it's a decent outline for the amateur attempting to understand what we're talking about, to understand how it sort of worked. Right.
Well, it's just basic business practices. And here's what we have. There used to be a lot more people out there who were processing the meat and selling it. And then somebody up above who had more money or who looked at this industry and said, well, I know how to make more money. I will buy out all of these smaller packing companies. Then I become the only one buying it. And since I'm the only place you can sell your product to, I can now demand the price that you're going to get, because as you just pointed out, there are no other people for me to take my product to. Okay. And if I centralize the buying of this product, I can also centralize the processing of this product, which means I can process it for a lower price. So I'm going to pay less for it. I'm going to spend less money to process it and getting it to market. And then I can up the price and I can make all kinds of money. And that's what we do in American business, right? We say, well, you take out the small mom and pop shops in towns, right? And it's because you got a super Walmart now, and everybody goes to the super Walmart, and mom and pop fall by the wayside because Walmart has more buying power. And that's what, if that makes sense to you, because we've talked about that on the show before, that's basically what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years to the meat industry, to the cattle industry, is that these smaller buying places, these smaller markets that Justin was talking about, have been bought out by the bigger processing companies. And now these bigger processing companies, 4 of them in the United States, control the majority, 86% of the cattle buying in the United States. So therefore, they can come together and say, you know what, we're all going to charge this price. This is all we're going to pay. And then the people who raise the beef don't have any other choice other than not selling it, right? Because you say, well, why don't they just keep them? Just keep them. Well, the problem is, as I learned in the article, once the cattle reach the weight that are necessary to sell, that's the time to sell, because if you don't sell them and you keep them, you have to keep spending money to feed them. And then they start to develop more fat and not as much muscle. And then they won't bring as much when you do take them to market. So this is kind of like, you raise I'll use my apples again. You raise your apples. You can't store them and hold them because they're going to rot and go bad. So you have to take them to market and take whatever the market bears. And what we have here is we've taken away competition, which is the lifeblood of capitalism, as Justin said.
A monopoly, Lance, is a dominant position of an industry or a sector by one company to the point of excluding all other viable competitors. And to your point, the illegal monopoly component, right, may be, well, you legally, are allowed to exist because, the Meatpackers, for example, could contend that, well, it's not like we're keeping somebody else from entering the business. If somebody wants to come along, start up and invest, $100 billion to build a new major meat packer, they could do that. We're not stopping it. But here's where the issue comes in, right? When a monopoly engages in price gouging or deteriorates the quality of the end product to the consumer in our country, that's where we're saying you're taking a step too far then, right? Because now you're using your power in a negative way, right? Yeah, if you can become a monopoly and it serves the consumer, and we don't feel like we're unfairly limiting competition, which we generally see as good for the consumer, then okay. But to Lance's point, the reason these lawsuits are being brought in is ranchers are saying, whoa, we're being gouged because of the authority and power that you have. And it's not helping. It's hurting. Your gouging of us doesn't make our lives better. It makes them worse. It makes it harder for us to do our job. The ranchers are basically, they're raising the calves, right? They have the cows, which are females that are bearing calves. Okay. They raise the cows that have the calves, and they allow the calves to roam across the grasslands until they're big enough to be sold to what is generally referred to as feedlots. Okay. And these are probably what you've seen the horror YouTube videos of and the stuff where you see the cattle and they're, living in this place where there's no grass and there's these fences and they're in these small little areas with fences, and the truck pulls in and dumps the feed and they eat the feed and there's nothing to do and nothing to see. And that's just how it is, and they don't have an area that's any bigger than an acre and sometimes less than that. That's what you're probably used to when you hear of feedlots. Although most cattle, they're not born on feedlots. Okay. They start with ranchers get them to a size. They sell them to the feedlot. The feedlot, what we say, they finish them. Okay. Which is what Lance was talking about. They get them to the ideal weight. Well, what's the ideal weight? The maximum amount of muscle with a minimal amount of fat. That's what we're talking about when we say the ideal weight. And to Lance's point, think about human beings, right? There's a limit to each of us. If we think about, there's a limit to how much muscle you can put on your body, right? And after that point, the only way to add weight would be to add fat, which we would all look at and say, well, that's probably not what we're after, right? I mean, we wanted to gain weight. We wanted to gain muscle. Well, there's a limit to how much muscle you can put on your body. And once you reach that limit, the only option that remains is fat.
When you go to buy a piece of meat, you don't want it laden with fat. You want some fat because it's tasty, but you want mostly muscle because that's what you're going to eat. You're not going to eat.
And it's the healthy part for you.
Right.
I mean, just to be.
Unless you're Jack Sprat's wife, because she could eat no lean. So she would eat the fat, but most of us don't want, we just want the marbled. We want the fat in there for taste, but we want mostly meat because we don't want to eat the fat.
So the point there is that that's a little background on how the process works. And then you might say, well, okay, but you just said the ranchers sell to the feedlots. So how is it the Meatpackers' fault? Because the Meatpackers are the ones that buy it from the feedlots.
Good point.
Okay, well, here's what you have to understand, right? What the Meatpackers are doing, because remember we talked about the sale barns and auction houses and going to market. We talked about that right before the end of the last segment as we transitioned into this one. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, what's changed, okay, is that the Meatpackers they sit at the sale barn and, we'll pay this, right? And sometimes the feedlots did too, because you'd bring in your young, calves ready to go to the feedlot. And so there'd be a lot of different people there, right? Bidding and the market would bear what it would bear. But now what the Meatpackers have done since they've moved to an 85% market control from 36% in the 1980s, remember, what they have done is they've said, it would behoove us, Lance, to not go to the sale barn. Because if I just approach a feedlot with a contract and set price terms and it's behind the scenes and nobody knows what it is, that sounds like a lot better deal, because I get a lot more control over how this deal is going to be worked. And then what happens? Here's the trickle down, right? Well, the feedlot struck this deal. So now the feedlot turns to the rancher and says, well, I can't tell you what I'm going to pay for these until after you give them to me. which you might be sitting there and saying, what? That's literally one of the stories in here of the gentleman who's getting ready to take, a whole bunch of cattle, hundreds of cattle, and has said, yeah, you're just going to have to give them to me, and then I'll let you know what I can give you after I have them. After you've signed on the dotted line that you've sold them, for a price that you get to set after I've given them to you.
No. Well, and it's not the kind that we normally, which is why there are the lawsuits now to try to break this up, because that's the argument that it's illegal the way they're handling things.
It just sounds...
But now we have to go to the courts.
Right.
For those of you who don't like that, but that's the way the system works, right? Is we have to go to the courts now and have the courts rule, okay, here's what's happening. Is this legal or not? Doesn't seem like it is, but we have to wait for the court's ruling.
And keeping in mind that it did not always used to be this way. Because in past decades, when beef prices went up, this is again the New York Times article here, which you can find linked at thestateofus.org, our website. But in the past, what would happen is the payments, Lance, they would go to the cattle ranchers who claimed over half of what consumers paid for meat. So you go to the store and you pay $10 for whatever this piece of meat is that you just bought. The rancher was getting 5 or 6 of those dollars, maybe even 7 or 8.
And now he's getting 37 cents on the dollar. So he's getting $3.70 instead of 5 or 6.
So it's gotten cut, almost in half.
Almost in half.
Or depending on how good it was, it's sometimes more than half, right? So, big change. And you think about, with most businesses, those of you out there in other industries, what type of effect would it have if tomorrow the company had to cut what it was selling its product for in half? Would you still have a job? Would the company still exist? I think a lot of industries would say, oh my God, no, we'd be out of business like tomorrow if we had to cut the price in half, if we had to offer everything at 50% off for forever.
To the point, these people are not even making their cost, much less making a livable wage.
Exactly. So what do we do about this? What should be done about this? And what about this whole thing of, is there an expiration date on the beef industry anyway? because of other external factors. We're going to talk about that, and you're going to find out. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Mordant today, Lance. Just, I am frustrated because we've got an unfortunate situation.
Well, this is an area that's near and dear to your heart, but it also is bringing up the monopolistic practices that we say we don't believe in here in the United States. It's for you, it's a lot personal. For me, it's the historical reference of this is an illegal monopoly and it's hurting the workers, and therefore we need to all get behind this and do something about it, because we're the benefactors, at least those of us who eat beef. Now, I was sitting here during the break and I was thinking, my daughters like beef, but they don't eat beef. Not like, and I think about, well, they're out of the house now and they tell me, I had this for dinner, and they don't eat beef. And then I go home and my wife says, I want this. And it's nearly always, I would say 4 out of 7 nights includes beef, if not 5 out of 7. Whether it's making spaghetti and spaghetti sauce, or it's frying a hamburger, or it's making meat for tacos, all of which you can use turkey or chicken. And that's what my daughters use. They use, the white meat and get away from the beef. But for my wife and myself, I don't mind the other meat and it's okay. But my wife's like, yeah, well, it tastes all right. I really like the beef. So is it a generational thing as well? And not to get you off track, but that's what I was thinking about. It's like, are we arguing for people that are a dying breed anyway? I mean, I don't want to say that, but is it, to your point, we have these things that are being developed. We did our taste test about, the Burger King burger, and you have the Simply Meats and the different, names of companies that are out there producing veggie burgers that taste like meat. So is this something that's going to go by the wayside anyway? Is this just a natural evolution of, well, these people have made money for, 100 years or so doing this, a couple hundred years, and now it's just going by the wayside because this isn't what people are going to eat anymore?
So Lance knows what he's done here. He's opened the, he has revived the, we made a lot of arguments for years, okay, because we did not primarily rely on taking cattle to market. We were direct to consumer. Now, we did not process the beef, okay? We worked with a local butcher shop who we had an arrangement with, that we would pay a certain price to, and then we would get the beef back and sell it to the consumer. So we handled everything from the moment from before the calf was on the ground, the conception, all the way to handing it to the consumer who was going to eat it.
Go home and fix it. Right.
So we were end to end. But one of the things in being end to end is you had to talk about that very thing of, I'd be amazed because we also sold chicken for people that don't know, and turkey. About the customers that I would have conversations with about that. Oh, well, I'm going to get the chicken because it's healthier, or the turkey because it's healthier. And
it's better for the planet.
And I would have to, and that argument was brought up as well. Better for the planet. We would have to have a conversation about, no, the way that you eat beef is what's unhealthy. It's not the beef, okay? The beef. Now, we could get into a long conversation about the base, proteins and all of that are available, and the leanness of chicken and beef and yada, yada. But at the end of the day, it boils down to what I think is a singular argument on the health of beef. How the beef is raised matters a great deal in the healthiness of the beef that you're eating, okay? That makes a big difference. And the other thing is what we talked about before, the fat content. How much fat is in that beef? Because beef does have a rare red meat, specifically beef, has the unique capacity of the other beefs to raise your good cholesterol, your good, I believe it's LDL. Mm-hmm. It's been a while since we've talked about this, okay? People think, watch your cholesterol because, well, when your doctor tells you to watch your cholesterol, just to be clear, what they're talking about is your bad cholesterol, Okay. For us non-medical professionals, Bradley's probably out there like just, ripping his hair out like, oh my God, they got this all wrong. There's no bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. There's this type and this type and, but it raises a cholesterol, one of the types of cholesterol to an unhealthy level that causes you to gain weight and by storing fat. Okay. Now, red meat, when consumed in the proper portion, and nobody's going to like to hear what that proper portion is, but when consumed in the proper portion every week, bar no other food, raises your good LDL, which actually increases your ability to burn fat naturally better than any other substance.
Well, for those of you who are out there new wave, that's the keto diet, which was back when I was a kid, the Atkins diet, right? You can have all the meat you want, just take out the carbs and you'll shed weight. And it works. To your point, it works because it does exactly what you said, and it fills you up, and your body then can break down more simple products instead of the complex carbohydrates that it's getting from the breads and the sweets and the everything else that we eat.
Exactly.
But the problem is we eat too much of it.
And
if we just eat the healthy amount, that's what it does. It does a lot of good things for our body.
What do you almost always eat when you're eating beef, right?
And how it's prepared.
Well, it's on a bun.
Right.
Oh, well, it's with mashed potatoes. Oh, well, it's with the pasta. Oh, well, it's in the spaghetti. And all of a sudden, right? Oh, well, you're not going to eat the beef because it's not healthy. Well, no, you're mitigating, you're totally getting rid of the positive benefits of beef because you're pairing it with stuff. Your bad cholesterol gets raised, and now you've eaten something that's going to cause you to store fat, and you just ate something that is high in fat. So, and we're surprised,
Right.
So, I mean,
exactly.
I guess we don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but the planet and the morals, I just want to address these because I think they're so important to discuss. The planet component, right? We've talked about this. I'll boil it down to this. Again, it goes back to how we do it. Feedlots, terrible for the environment, okay? Partly because we're feeding cattle something that they would not naturally eat. Oh, you mean that it's bad for the planet when we give a natural creature something that it wouldn't eat out in nature, and then it causes a bad effect? Whoa. I mean,
It's just like
bizarre.
I can go out and pick greens and I'm healthy. And if I go to McDonald's and eat that, I'm not healthy because I'm eating something that was not made for me to eat and my body to run on.
Yeah. It's that the fast food effect,
really well.
right?
I understand that example.
My stomach was torn up after I ate that fast food, but then I ate this piece of broccoli and, I got cleaned out, but I was cleaned out and I feel good now.
In a healthy way.
Right?
Yeah.
It's amazing, that little difference. Your body's pretty smart, and we're amazed at the amount of methane that cattle produce. And it's I don't know if you've noticed, but you produce more methane when you go to fast food. I mean, I'm just saying,
Yes, it is.
not to get too crude here with our listeners, but I'm just being honest, right? Because your body doesn't process it the same way. And we're doing that to cattle, and then we're upset and we're saying, well, it's the cattle's fault, right? We have to stop raising cattle because methane, Well, but it's a lot of what we're giving the cattle that's the problem.
If we'd feed the cattle more natural substances, then the methane would not be the issue.
So there's a lot of things that go into it, and I think people boil it down too much. And the last thing that I just want to mention, Lance, is the ethics, because I think this one's so important, just to give people something to chew on, okay?
Oh, that's punny.
No matter how ethical you think you are in your diet, okay, animals were killed in the making of your food. And yeah, I'm talking to you vegans out there who are listening to this, okay? Because the snakes, the mice, the moles, the worms, they were being killed to plow the field that we put your crops in for you to eat. And you killed all the mosquitoes and you killed all the beetles because we had to keep them off of that plant that you wanted to eat. Well, but we don't want to slaughter the cattle because they're cute. And we don't care about the beetle because it's ugly.
But it's all part of the ecosystem that it puts together and makes the planet work.
Right. I don't eat chicken, and I don't eat pork, and I don't eat, beef because they're cute. I only eat fish. That's the only meat that I consume. Okay, well, there's just look it up. Sentient lobsters, okay? one example of the many types of seafood that we now better understand. One of the reasons we haven't understood them for so long is because they're very different from us, right? For example, they wear their skeleton on the outside. You know what I mean? That's one small thing. But we now know they feel pain, you know. Well, cattle feel pain. Right. And all I'm saying is you're just making choices.
But to wrap it all up, basically what we're saying is there seems to be an illegal monopoly in the meat industry, in the beef industry, that is harming the people who are producing the product.
And it shouldn't be dismissed.
Even while you're paying more for it at the market.
And it shouldn't be dismissed because of any of those arguments that we just talked about. Because there are people, human beings, who rely on this industry, right? And I do think it's changing, Lance. I mean, we've talked about the lab-grown meat. We had the Impossible Burger on this show. It's changing, but it's not going to go away in the next 10 years. It may dwindle, but we got to do something in the meantime. And that's kind of, I think, the whole point of what we're talking about. I'd imagine that our listeners could tell your mordant disdemeanor today, and mine as well. Disdemeanor? Misdemeanor.
Just demeanor.
Demeanor.
Yeah.
I wanted to add the dis in front of it.
Yeah. You don't
disdemeanor.
No. That is a word.
Yeah. But not what I was.
No, it's just my demeanor.
All right.
Yeah.
So what are we doing here, Lance? Well, some listeners are wondering.
Well, we let Justin rant about the beef industry and me talk about the immoral practices of capitalism, monopolies.
You don't like when people are getting gouged.
I do not at all. But our larger mission is to bring things to the public that maybe they weren't aware of and that they could know about and talk to other people about. And we call that our mission statement, and it's to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that today. And hopefully we brought up something that you didn't know about that you can share with others if you're as upset about it for any of the variety of reasons that we've given you to be upset about it, that you can share that with others. And they say, well, this sounds like an interesting show. I hadn't heard about that, but that is something that I would like to know more about. Well, we do that twice a week on this show. And so we'd love to have more listeners and tell them they can find us wherever they find podcasts like Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts.
The State of Us is available, Lance, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we're actually, just a little fun tidbit, we record on a farm and there's some cattle outside here.
I say hi to them.
Lance brings
every
them
night.
apples sometimes.
Bring them apples.
We're disclosing full bias here
sir.
on this show.
Where we're coming from.
We probably should have mentioned it up front, but we're available Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast, heard on the weekends across the country, in the paved streets of New York to the fields of Ohio and everywhere in between. And we can be heard on the weekends on those AM and FM radio stations. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I think I take the win today. Solidly take that win. Mordant. That Mordant demeanor.
Bradley's going to cut all this anyway, so just keep talking. It's good.
Oh, okay. All right. Got it. Thanks, Bradley. I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to Bradley Butch for his extraordinary editing capabilities and mainly for putting up with Lance and myself for as long as he has. And thank you to the audience for the same.
And I let Justin win today, so he'll keep playing.
Greatly appreciated for you tolerating us. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.